This is our HIMSS at Home edition of our webinar. For if you guys are like me, you're all bummed out that you didn't make it to HIMSS this week. This talk is based on the talk that I was going to give at the Cyber Pavilion at HIMSS. And what we're going to talk about today is what Nukes can teach you about medical device security. Just move the slide. Oh, there you go. So this is me. I'm based in the Boston area, and I'm focused on healthcare and life sciences for OWL. Right now, my main focus has been around medical devices and also around pharma manufacturing security. And our talk today is, this is the agenda for our little talk today. It's going to be about 20, 30 minutes. We're going to talk a little bit about some stats around medical device security. We're going to talk a little bit about risk, and then why we're thinking of nuclear power plants and how that relates to medical device security. So what is the state of medical device cybersecurity? Not great, right? We looked at some stats that are out there trying to understand what's going on in the environment. As many of you heard, a lot of medical devices are running operating systems that are no longer supported, for example, Windows 7. Also, a large number of them have vulnerabilities that are not being patched. They're vulnerabilities that have been around for more than a year and that haven't been patched. And finally, there's some statistics showing that a great majority of healthcare organizations have had a hack of one of their devices or have been attacked in the past year. So this means that medical devices are actually at risk of being hacked, and they present a very clear vector for attacks. And if you think about how many devices there are there, a typical hospital might have thousands of medical devices in their environment that, mixed with their prevalence and also with the kind of vulnerabilities they have, this presents a serious risk. And a lot of people could be harmed. And so we were thinking about, oh, what's an equivalent industry where we see this happening that we have experience in? And of course, naturally, we thought of nuclear reactors. Now, why did we think of nuclear reactors? I'll explain that. If we were to look at a chart of things that are very important, things like human life is very important, the most important, right? So, you know, there might be a human, even if he's a national treasure like Jeff Goldblum, you know, very important, that one individual life. If we were to look at power plants, if a power plant were to melt down, that is really, really bad. So the severity of that is horrible. And also to the sense that a lot of people would die, right? So they're up in the upper right corner there as something that, if it happened, would kill a lot of people, and it's really bad. Medical devices, if something were to happen to a medical device, that's bad. Maybe not as bad as a meltdown, but it's still very bad. And if you think of, if you have one exploit for a medical device and there's hundreds of them in a hospital, you could affect a lot of people at one go. And so we see that it also being very high on that level of what it could cause in damage. And so it also is in that upper right of severity and value, but maybe not as bad as nuclear power plants, but we can see a parallel there. So when we were thinking about nuclear power plants, we're like, okay, how did nuclear power plants secure themselves? And I was reminded of a little story about like why nuclear power plants are so big on security is because they are a very prime target. And what they've done is they've separated the networks. They've air-gapped them so that their networks are not connected at all to any other networks of their operational networks. And they've also restricted access to their networks. What they've also done is, because they still want to get the data out of their networks, they've converted the connections into one-way connections out of their network. They still can get the data out of their network, but no one can come in that way, in that one-way direction. Another thing that they do is if something has to come in, let's say a software update or a patch or something that comes into from a non-secure area to the secure area, they will go through a vetting process to make sure that that software is what it's supposed to be. And how they do this is they use data diodes. So data diodes are a hardware component that enforces traffic in one direction of a network so that that connection can no longer be used for hacking. Interestingly, these data diodes have allowed them to keep their networks connected, and whatever hack that might already exist in their systems can't be accessed from the outside. Also, for when they're bringing media in from the less secure zone to the higher secure zone, they have things like media kiosks that then will check, let's say, USB keys or software updates to make sure that that software is done properly. And finally, what they've been doing is hardening the operating systems of all their equipment to make sure that what's been built of their operating system has all the policies in place to make sure that it's secure, and also removing things that don't need to be there. So constructing the operating system deliberately with security in mind. Now, if we think in terms of medical devices, and we translate this into medical devices, it's the same thing, right? So obviously, you want to restrict access to the medical device as much as possible. And this doesn't mean necessarily not letting anybody touch it, but like how people can access it to make any changes to it. Also, one thing that we stress a lot is understanding your network in terms of all the connections that are going out. And in that way, we think that you should ask yourself why you have the connections you have, which directions that these connections need to go, reduce or eliminate connections if they're not necessary, or convert as many as possible into one-way. Because if you convert them into a one-way connection, that is one less connection that you have to worry about as a vector into a device. Also, if you need to monitor your device, which all of them do, right? So basically a medical device is something that is used for monitoring patients or for getting data from a patient. Understand that one-way direction and use that monitoring in one way. But at the same time, you need to get data back into it. Let's say a formulary update or a software patch. When you do that data going back into your medical device, understand how you keep those protocols secure, that you only let the things that go into it go into it. And finally, one thing that we're talking with medical device manufacturers is around hardening their operating system. So how do they build their operating system from the get-go to be secure by design? So of course, this leads to how can OWL help, right? And so on our side, we have hardware solutions for controlling the traffic in one direction. So we have data diodes and some other embedded solutions that we use. We also do device vulnerability assessments where we can take in a device and inspect it and understand how that device works, how is the device secure, and how do we improve the risk management of that one device. Also, we have tools for bringing in software from a non-secure zone into a secure zone, and all the things you need to do to either clean it up or make sure that that works properly and make sure that the data is clean when it's coming into the secure zone. And finally, we work with the device manufacturers to harden their OSs and harden their firmware so that it's built security from the get-go. Finally, if you want to know more about what we've been doing in the medical device space and in hardware-based security, we have resources such as our blog where I regularly post stuff around medical device security. I've also written a few industry briefs around this so that you guys can read some things more in detail. And of course, I'm always a resource. You can always ask me questions and we can discuss how we can secure your medical devices. Thank you.